Imperialism, Methods of Control, Unit 10. First, let's talk about old versus new imperialism. Back in the age of exploration, European countries were practicing an imperialism that was more limited. And this would be the kind of imperialism that actually started the American colonies that eventually became the United States. The European nations had less territorial control. Lots of times their settlements were limited to coastal regions or just to trading posts, and they had less influence over people's daily lives. The new imperialism of the 18 and 1900s was much more invasive than this. It involved larger areas and populations. It sought to control people's economic, political, and social lives, and in many cases it forced people to adopt European customs. The forms of control that were exercised in the new imperialism included the establishment of a colony where a country or territory is governed by a foreign power, a protectorate, a country where its own government continues to be in control, but that government is under the control of an outside power, a sphere of influence, where an area is claimed by a foreign nation, usually for an economic benefit like trading privileges or investment privileges, and economic imperialism, where the nation continues to be independent, but its resources are controlled by foreign-owned businesses. The methods of management that were used in this new imperialism really came down to two types of management. The first was indirect control, which was favored by Great Britain and the United States. This is where local officials would handle the daily management of the government, and the colony itself would have limited self-rule and usually have a legislature that made laws. And the idea with indirect control was that one day these colonies would likely become independent, and they needed leadership so that when that happened, they'd have people who were capable of being the rulers. And the government was based on a European style, but many were able to keep their local customs. This is indirect control. Now contrast that with direct control, which was favored by France, Germany, and the other European nations. They believed that the colonial people could not handle the complexities of governing themselves, that they just weren't capable of doing that. So they developed a system that was very paternal in nature. And by paternal, that means fatherly, like a family, where the European country would provide for the people's needs but did not give them any rights. So when we say it was family, it's family in a bad way. People were governed by European officials with very little control over what happened to them, and the expectation here was assimilation, that rather than keeping their local customs, populations should adopt European culture and ways of doing things, including the way they set up their schools, their courts, and their businesses. The impact of imperialism, first of all, for the countries that are being colonized, the impacts are, especially in the short term, much more negative than they are positive. These areas lost control of their land and lost their independence. Many of the native people died of diseases and from rebellions resisting colonization. They began to grow cash crops for the parent country instead of food, which led to widespread famines and starvation. Traditional culture was destroyed. Families were separated because men had to go out and look for work. And boundaries, like the boundaries of Africa that were drawn during the Berlin Conference, united tribes that had been historical rivals in single colonies where it was difficult for them to get along, and divided kinship groups or traditional allies among multiple colonies. Imperialism did have some positive effects, but these are a little more difficult to see, and they happened over a longer period of time. Local tribal warfare was reduced when imperial governments came in and took control. Health and sanitation improved. Often hospitals were built, medical treatment improved, lifespan and literacy rates increased. The value of African products on the world market increased, but this primarily benefited the countries doing the colonizing rather than the countries being colonized. And infrastructure was developed. Railroads, dams, telephone lines, and telegraph lines were built. So this is the impact of imperialism. This is the end of this video. If you need to rewind or rewatch any part of it, please feel free to do so. Thanks for listening.